Hello, hello. What's up? What's up? It is a new day, it is a new week, and it's time to get social. My name is KaVonna, and welcome to the Introverts Social Hour. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Introverts Social Hour. This is your girl, KaVonna. I am super excited to talk about this episode today. When it comes to being too nice and it comes to being too kind, people tend to not know the difference, whether it's about themselves and what excessive kindness and excessive niceness looks like, or in regards to how other people treat them. And this is a conversation my friend Nicole and I have had before in previous times. And these are struggles that we come up with when it comes to, just being the dependable ones. It ends up being hard, especially when you are naturally kind at heart. But then the struggle comes of not wanting to be taken advantage of. So we're gonna talk about about that today. What it looked like, growing up, and what it looks like now, in combating those things and making sure we draw our lines and our boundaries. Um, Nicole is going to hop on into this conversation a bit later into the episode. But I'm going to talk about my experience and what it looks like now, specifically for me, and once again, more specifically, why this topic is being talked about. Um, it's going to be a super candid conversation. It's going to be a conversation in regards to growth, what that has looked like for me, and when Nicole hops on, what that has looked like for Nicole. The biggest thing is just what that growth looks like in regards to gaining respect, and specifically self-respect, and maintaining that throughout all of your relationships, whether it's work, family, friendships, etc. And it's a big conversation in regards to balance. So, I did want to talk about one, what the difference is between kindness and niceness. People don't tend to really know or tend to talk about it. I myself had to really think about it at a certain point too. I was like, am I being too kind or am I being too nice? Is it both? What does that look like? Etc. etc. So I did want to talk about what my perspective of kindness versus niceness looks like. Doesn't necessarily have to be versus, but it can be in those key scenarios. So when I think of kindness, I think of, like that genuine care and consideration for others. When you're kind, you're just naturally thinking, whether it's about a person, your actions, all of that is just natural. It just comes to you. It's not to, you know, please anyone or anybody. No one else is really a thought. It's just like a natural thing that happens. Now, in opposition, when it comes to niceness, I think it stems from, like the desire to please someone or to also avoid conflict. So when it comes to those definitions, that's where I think it comes in being too nice. But let me know in the comments on my Instagram what you think. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree on those definitions? What does that look like to you? Um, but I will say that once again, in my experience, I've seen it as being too nice now, like being reflective on it. Um, mainly in work, but I've also seen that in family dynamics and also friendships, more so in the past, not really now. I think as I got older, from, childhood to college to adulthood now, because college and adulthood are two different things in my eyes. Very different types of adulting for sure. Um, I think I definitely drew lines at friendships first, because I realized that more of what those boundaries looked like. And then as I got older, around college, in my college years, I would say I started drawing lines with family, and a lot more so after I graduated from college. And then now in my adulthood and experiencing different jobs after college, I worked a lot in college too, but I was seeing more issues post college in those jobs and careers, especially now as a teacher, like my first like big 9 to 5. Figuring out how to draw lines within work. And I would say, once again, especially as a teacher, because there are dynamics, dynamics at play that do involve. It's hard to explain. It's really weird, to be honest, but like teachers are kind of seen to have to be, overworked. And it's kind of like this weird culture that I've seen in regards to like leadership. It's like, this is your job as a teacher, this is your role, this is what teachers do. But just because that's like the way, I'm doing quotation marks, that's the way, doesn't mean it's the correct way. Um, And I've always had this thought, and this is why we have this huge turnover now and continuous turnover that I really don't see ending anytime soon, because if there's no care and consideration, um, there's no change. There's not going to be any change in, you know, these turnover rates. Um, but I've talked about that. Listen to the Teachers Deserve More episode. I don't want to dive too deep, but it does play a huge role in what being too nice and being too kind look like for me today. I think those are where I have the main issues of drawing my lines and boundaries. For me, I'm a naturally considerate person. I think that's where I have my issues now of as I've grown up and I've always been like this. So like I see something, ooh, I got it for you, or ooh, I know that they would appreciate this right now. Let me do this for them to help them like lessen their load. Or oh, I got this for them because I know they said they mentioned that they needed it and they had to add it into their list or their schedule for the day. And I'm already here and I see it. So let me just grab it. Things like that. I've always just been naturally considerate. But what I've noticed is the world is not. So I've kind of gotten the short end of the stick, um, with many of situations, whether it was work or family, etc. Of it's like I'm always considering, and it's just naturally happening. But at the end of the day, like no one's considering me or no one's thinking about me. And when I'm struggling, I'm kind of like set to struggle on my own. And while I can do that, and I have always grown up kind of doing that, it's not the way it should be, and I should be able to depend and support and get support from other people. But for some reason that wasn't coming up the same. And um, learning to draw lines, even in kindness, even though it was the niceness that was the main issue, but even in kindness of maybe it's time to step back a little bit. Um, I'm not gonna lie, it kind of hardened my shell as I got older. Just protection for myself. Not saying I became this mean Grinch, um, but definitely just decided like I have to draw some lines. And it's like, oh, I do think about this, or I think about that, or I could have got this from under. But it's like, I think, you know, backing up a little bit and giving a bit my boundaries. Because as you get older, you start to notice like you would cross many lines for someone or jump a few hoops for someone. And at a certain point, you realize, oh, okay, they wouldn't do the same for me. So, not saying you do it for something in return, but after doing it so many times, and there's a lack of balance in that relationship, whatever it is. So I think it's super important to make sure you do find a balance and you do find your boundaries. Um, in regards to being too nice, this was a bigger issue in my younger years, but I did want to mention like those experiences of not really being a conflict kid. I was not about the drama. I'm still the person like, "Ooh, what's the tea, sis?" But I'm not trying to be in the tea, you know? And I'm not gonna be an instigator in situations either. I'm gonna listen to it. I'm gonna keep it to myself as my own little storybook. I'm not about to be like, "Oh, did you hear da 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 da?" If you tell me it's silent mode, don't tell nobody, I won't tell nobody. It's quiet as kept. Um but it is it's still that way now, but it was always that way. But the problem was because I am a naturally considerate and kind person, and um nice as well in just general, just like, interactions. And if I don't have beef with you, I'm gonna, politely interact with you. Um but even with people that maybe did have issues with me, also still being nice to avoid conflict and to just like avoid any issues at all. Or someone said something sly to me real quick, and I was like, laughed it off and kept it pushing, even though in my mind I had a few words 5 minutes later when my my comebacks came. If you could relate, the comebacks come about 24 hours later. You're like, oh, I should have said that. That was me. I didn't really bite back, um, because I was trying to avoid conflict, and I just didn't want to deal with it. I also, go ahead and listen to the Anxious and Introverted podcast episode. Um, I'm also an anxious being, and as I got older, I realized that. But when I was younger, I didn't realize like, those kind of things made me anxious. Like any form of conflict or like, oh my gosh, like what's happening? Like I get spiked up. Some could be like, hey, can we talk? Oh my gosh, what do they want to talk about? What is it? It could be then it could be like, hey, can we talk about something that, hey, great job today. I don't know. So don't send me a hey, can we talk? Let me know what you want to talk about, because my anxiety is going to spike up. So that plays a part in also being too nice and um just trying to just be at peace with myself. But being too nice ends up losing boundaries elsewhere, and then I still end up losing peace in other situations and categories. Um, when it comes to being too nice, then you're not speaking your voice. I learned this growing up. I learned that I'm not developing healthy boundaries by not speaking up for myself and trying to keep the peace. You can keep the peace and still state what you need to say and draw lines about what it looks like for people to respect you, so you can make sure your self-respect is at bay. It's not in movement, you're not shifting it, you're not, shrinking yourself down. And if anything, you're building yourself up. I was finding situations in which I was having to speak up for myself. Like, as I've gotten older, like I said, like I've hardened my shell in regards to kindness in a way. But I've also hardened my shell in niceness. Like, those comments aren't going to stay inside my head. I'm gonna still be respectful, but I'm gonna come back at you. Don't talk to me like that, you know? Um, and I think that's so important because like it really was like, oh, hee hee ha ha, like, oh, just being nice and being very cordial. But you can be respectful and still state your piece. Um, once again, because people are interesting in this world, and you can be as kind and as nice, but at the end of the day, people are still going to be people. um and they're going to be who they are. So when you come across those people who decide to test it one day, you got to say your piece so they don't have to try it again. And yes, you're getting a little piece of KaVonna out here, because not many people know that I'm very nice. I am. um but don't come at me. There's words. There will be words at this point, because I know that I'm not a very conflictive person. I'm probably making that word up. If I am, YOLO. Um, like, I get really like shooketh when people are trying to come at me because it just doesn't make sense. So I will give you my words, but once again, respectfully, because at the end of the day, I'm still going to respect you as a human being, even if you've decided to not do the same. Now, is that being too nice? Something to consider. I don't think so, because I'm all just about like respect. And if I am realizing that maybe I have started the process of being disrespectful, maybe in times of being too nice, I was a little bit passive aggressive, but they didn't know why, things like that. Um, then I'll own up to it, assuming I realize it, in like my reflective state. But yeah, it's just like it's a whole conversation, right? Um, now what I realize it's just super important though to just prioritize your own needs as a human being and your own well-being. So when it comes to you being too nice and brushing off something, you think about it for however long, and it's eating you up, and you're thinking about it. It's like, oh, this really bothered me. And then you don't speak your piece, and it's gonna stick. What I've discovered is you speak your piece, it goes away. And it's like, wow, you think, right? But once again, coming and growing up and going through those experiences in middle school, high school, college, and afterwards, it really just took going through them, um, to understand and figure out what worked for me as KaVonna, just as a human being. Because what works for me isn't gonna work for everyone else. And then also too, we're all different. So you might be listening to this and not have the same problem that I have. You can either relate or not relate at all, and that's perfectly fine. Um, what I did want to say is communication is super important as well, which is why I talked about like passive aggressiveness. What I've also learned is that sometimes me drawing my boundaries ended up looking like me low key trying to get my point across. And in reality, I'm not getting my point across because I'm not communicating. Instead, I'm being like very sharp with someone, being very stern. I realized and I reflect on that in college, and it was just like, no, you should have just said, "Hey, you're not doing your job properly. I have a heavy load. Can you step it up? Thanks." And then I would have felt a lot better versus like being passive aggressive, then kind of feeling bad that I think I snapped on someone like 5 minutes ago, and I'm like, dang. Reflect on that now, and I'm like, yeah, I definitely could have spoke my piece. Um, but once again, it's a learning process. The idea also too is like I didn't want to be a pushover. I didn't want to, but I was still being kind about it because I was considering other people's feelings. But then also I was like, no, Kimani, you're being too nice because now you're getting more work being put on you when someone else is not doing their part. Um, and so that's in regards to, like work relationship, work partnerships. And that was just a weird figuring out to do. Like, do I have the answers now? I have better answers now. Is the end all be all? No. But for example, as a teacher, there's a lot of there's so many things you have to do, especially if y'all know at this point, go listen to the Teachers Deserve More episode. But I do work at a charter school. So with charter school experiences, you do, unfortunately, there's a lot put on you when you're a salary girly. They can throw a lot at you at a lot of different points in times, and you be working long hours, and this idea of like being able to be moved anywhere at any time is a thing, and they're not used to people drawing boundaries. And I remember last year I had to draw some boundaries, even this year, but last school year I had to draw some boundaries, and they didn't like it, and they pushed back. And then I had to reflect, and then I had to draw those boundaries again. And it was there's a certain point where you have to say no, and it's okay saying no. And once again, knowing your boundaries, knowing your limits for your needs and your well-being. Um that was a big thing. Not being a pushover, being able to say no. Saying no is okay. Does it work for you? Is it okay for you? Um Especially when it comes to people needing your support or needing things from you, is it okay? And I think for me, growing up, I had to like really think like it's okay to say no, and it's not you being mean, it's not you being cruel, and it's not you losing your kindness in any way. It's you just drawing boundaries, and that's fine. Because I would feel bad sometimes about, oh, I can't do that, or I can't do that. Oh, this is happening, and being like, no, actually, Kayvonna, like that's fine. You're okay. Like, that if you would have added this onto your plate, you'd have been more stressed. You would have had to do more of this or that, and you wouldn't have been okay. And I think that's what's important. Um, and I say all this to say, because I know I'm a dependable person. It has always been that way. Like, oh, Kayvonna can do this, or Kayvonna got that, and she's good at this, or she could do that. And it's just like there's a certain point where maybe, hey, stop stretching me so thin, and I'm gonna draw my boundaries now. Get that rubber band and snap back. um, because I was getting pulled in a lot of different places, and connection back again. So this is a whole other conversation of just like lack of appreciation, and is it even worth it? Um, when it feels, instead of like supporting and being kind and considerate, at a certain point, it just feels like being consistently used, um, instead of properly connected. I don't know how to properly explain that. Let me know if you get it in the chats, in the Instagrams. But that was a struggle I was going through. It's a consistent on and off struggle. Once again, um, being a dependable person, being good at what you do, um, specifically in work, but also I'm a dependable person in my family. So drawing lines in family as well. Being like, hey, I'm actually going to say no to that. And actually, I realize that everyone's calling on me for these things, and I would like you to be able to find support in other areas. And I'm here for you, of course. But out of 10 items, you're asking me for 9 of them, and I'm your first call. And there's other people to reach out to. Um, and it was hard, but it was also necessary. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this. I'm super excited to bring Nicole on. We can relate in a lot of ways to these things. And we also have had ups and downs and growth and struggle in regards to what being too nice looks like, and that fight against it with our expression of our general kindness and who we are as human beings. But once again, super excited. So stay tuned for the conversation with Nicole. Woo woo. All right, y'all. As y'all know, I'm bringing on Nicole to talk about this conversation of, being too nice, and, what that difference of niceness and kindness looks like. If y'all don't know Nicole, you should at this point. But if you don't know Nicole, just so you know, Nicole Sowers is a queer writer based in Los Angeles. They've been writing since they were 8 years old, and it doesn't get any easier. I'll drop the socials for Nicole in the description, and also at the end of this episode. But hey, Nicole, welcome back.
Hi. Long time no see.
Right. So as you know, today we're talking about what it looks like to be too nice. This episode stemmed from a conversation that we had before about what that looks like, and sometimes the struggles with that, and who we are personally, and there's just a whole situation in regards to like relationships and things.
Mhm.
Um, but I want to talk about the difference. So what do you think that difference looks like between like being kind and being nice? Where does that fall?
For me, I feel like kindness is not necessarily something you are, but something you do.
Mhm.
It's when you make the choice to do something to help somebody out without thinking like what's in it for me, that's
Mhm.
kindness. And sometimes it's taking a step back and being more gentle with somebody even when you're frustrated and things
Yeah.
like that. And niceness is more about politeness of like, oh, I don't want to like ruffle any feathers. I'm going to be really nice about this, which
Mhm.
that distinction can be where I sometimes fall into trouble where I'm like, I'm trying to be kind, but I end up being too nice instead.
Yeah.
And instead of trying to like do good, I'm trying to not hurt anyone's feelings. And that's not always productive.
Yeah. I agree with that because I think that's why I changed the episode title. At first it was gonna be like being too kind. And I was like, wait,
Hmm.
no. Because I was like, when you really think about it, there's nothing wrong with being like too kind. Like I'm
Hmm.
genuinely like I also too like I'm very considerate. So that ends up me also doing like very kind things and generous things a lot of the time because I just consider people and kind of like what they're going through and things like that. But
Hmm.
being too nice is where I fall short.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what gets me not necessarily in trouble, but brings on the struggles of the things of life that, we'll talk about. But what out of curiosity, when did you discover you were a little too nice? What was the first moment for you?
I am not sure because I feel like a part of the reason that I'm kind of at this point in my life where I've discovered I'm too nice is because being nice was such a core part of my identity for a really long time. Like,
Mhm.
I remember in high school, I went through a really rough time and I was like, I'm going to refocus and like not try not to get myself into any more drama with other people. Like, I'm
Mhm.
just going to focus on being nice and I'm going to do my best to be nice to everybody around me. And in when I was a senior, I remember I was like passing around my yearbook and stuff like that, and overwhelmingly the two things that people wrote in my yearbook, like "You're so nice and funny," and I was like, "Yes, I've done it."
Yeah.
But especially when I started to um, get a little bit older, and especially in terms of things like work and workload, and some of the more complex relationships you get into as an adult, is when I started to be like, oh, maybe just being nice isn't like a pinnacle of identity that I need to hit. Like that's when I kind of
Mhm.
started making that distinction of like doing something kind versus being a nice person, because deciding I was a nice person kind of put limits on me in two different ways. And so I
Mhm.
think probably somewhere in that college areas where it was like, you know what, maybe this is not like the best way to live my life all the time.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think for me, it also happened in college. I think I was reflecting back on high school a lot.
Mm,
And I want to say I was kind of like low key a pushover because I
mm.
was so nice and wanted to like people please. I've never been a person about the drama, and high school just naturally happens, but that's because people would pull you into things.
Oh
I
yeah.
stayed away from it though. I can't think of like any like huge drama moments, and any of the ones I can think of is because people pulled me into it and
Mhm.
wanted to stir a pot because I was unproblematic.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly, and
yeah.
almost the niceness plays into that, like,
Mhm.
I got dragged into a lot of stuff, which is where when I kind of hit that point of, like, I'm just gonna be nice. Because
Mhm.
I was trying to be nice and support the friend that was in front of me, I would end up, that kind of, like, three-way call on Mean Girls where they're like, "Oh,"
Mhm.
complaining about a person, you're like, "Oh, that really sucks, like, I see what you mean," and then they turn around and tell that person, "You'll never guess what they said about
What?
you."
Why that happened to me in middle school?
Yeah, you know, it's wild the things that you the kids get up to.
LOL. Yeah, right. The teen drama of it all.
Hmm.
But no, yeah, that's what I think back to. And I think in college I was starting to make those changes of I'm gonna be a bit harder and a little bit more like hard shelled. That doesn't mean I'm mean, but that
Hmm.
means I'm not gonna let you like walk over me. Like I'm
Hmm.
gonna call you out now. Now I was finding it was weird because then I was like starting to get a bit passive aggressive. And so it was like, where do we get that
Yes,
line? Where does that line fall? And I'm still
exactly.
learning that, to be honest, to not be passive aggressive and just kind of like blatantly say what's on my mind and
Hmm.
um not necessarily try to brush it off, but then at the end of the day I'm not fully brushing it off, so then I'm low-key being rude. But
Yes,
they don't know
exactly.
why, you know.
Yeah, I
um
definitely found that in myself too. Whereas when I started going, oh, I'm being too nice, so I would compensate for that by trying to care a little bit less about like, oh, I don't need to care as much about like what everybody thinks about what I'm doing.
mhm.
And then I kind of got on had to bring it back where I was like, oh, now I'm being a little too selfish and like not considering what other people are thinking. And so it is definitely like a flow where I'm trying to dial in like how do I maintain like a kindness at my core while still not allowing other people to take advantage of that and
Yeah,
hurt me.
yeah, I definitely agree. It was a figuring out in college and even post college. Like I remember like going back home, I had like some like issues of like wanting to like kind of like be a people pleaser, but also like there were issues that should have been addressed. And so I was kind of like
Hmm.
passive aggressive. And then, people like, what the heck is going on? Why are you acting like this? And I'm like, I'm mad. And it's just like, well, you didn't say that, you know?
Exactly.
Where have you found challenges like finding that balance though between like being nice, um, or even like being kind, even in those two
Hmm.
separate instances, and having self-respect?
Um, One of the biggest areas for me has definitely been work
Oh yeah.
because I always hold myself to a really high standard and I kind of go back and forth on like I hold myself to a really high standard. I try and have all my things handled and I tend to be a little too kind in that I will overextend myself. I'll offer to help out too much. And then when other people who aren't that kind of like plan ahead type person
Mm-hmm.
start to have issues and things fall through, then I'm frustrated because I'm like, I had all my shit together and now I have to scramble last minute because you didn't. And
Yeah.
I had already took on all this work because I was up to capacity and now I have to rearrange things and make it work not because I didn't plan ahead, but because someone
Mhm.
else did. And that's where that frustration kind of comes in. And I get overloaded and then I start to get mean. And I'm like, no, I need to stop.
Yeah. Mhm.
And that's been hard on the level of like, I always want to be doing well and like striving to do as much as I can, as good
Mhm.
as I can. And then seeing other people who, to me, aren't putting in that amount of effort has always been really frustrating. So trying to like reorient my thought process both on how I view other people when I'm working with them and
Mhm.
how much I'm putting in because I can't be putting in 110% as a default because when things get hosed up at the last minute,
Yeah.
I have nothing left to adapt. So that I'm still not there because I still want to be doing my most at all times. um
Yeah.
and
That's a hard one.
yeah, work. So I'm like, I'm gonna be doing my best, but I can't always be working at full capacity
Yeah.
or else I get burnt out.
Also, too, I've just learned along the way, you work at full capacity, everybody's gonna see that and be 100% comfortable to work at 50%.
Yeah, what is
Yeah.
with that?
Yeah. And everyone's okay with it. Management's
Mhm.
okay with it. And so I we talk about this because we're very similar in that aspect of
Yeah.
our work lives. But I've also learned that too, because I am the person that my jobs, plural, of all the jobs I've had, people know that they can count on me. Like,
Mhm.
and it's like I love that, but I have then found out that I cannot then count on you, and that's really
Exactly.
frustrating. So
Yeah.
then I'm learning along the way, especially being a 9 to 5, and yes, I am a teacher, and yes, teachers go through these same struggles because, especially in a charter school, you don't just get to teach your classes and be on your own. It's a whole thing, and so
Mhm.
um learning to do my job well for the kids,
Mhm.
but I'm gonna step back at like in other aspects because yeah, other people can, and it gets a little frustrating when I see that happening and they're doing a 50% of their job and getting paid the same.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I'm like,
Ooh, it boils my blood, and
yeah.
it can lead to burnout and passive aggression, and like
Mm-hmm.
you get frustrated, and I do really I really struggle with it because it feels like I'm working really hard and being nice about it, where I'm not saying like, oh, I'm working really hard all the time and like
Mm-hmm.
calling other people out for not pulling their weight and things like that.
Yeah.
But then it kind of contributes to the problem because I'm working really hard and not complaining about it. So people think it's like natural for me, like it's so easy, when it's like, no, I
Mm-hmm.
am working hard to do well. I'm not just doing well and
Mm-hmm.
it's, whatever for me.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, what about like in other aspects? So like family, friends, what
Mhm.
has that balance look like? I could give some examples to start off. For me, the way I have my work life, I'm very held accountable in my family life and like so that was the struggle I was finding as I was getting older. Like I love that you can depend on me, but there are other
Mhm.
people that need to be able to pull that weight a bit more.
Well, yeah,
Um, because it's a lot of pressure and I don't deserve that. And
exactly.
so I was learning that as I got older. And even now, I love that I could be like, we're like, I love my grandma, but she's always like, oh yeah, you can do that, you know, when one of my brothers is struggling with something. And I'm like, no, that's not my responsibility.
Yeah.
Now I will balance properly. I will help where I can and things like that, but I'm going to start drawing lines a bit more. And I
Mhm.
think that was helpful for me in my mental sanity. If listeners out there, if you're a firstborn, you know the struggle. 'Cause
I
it's
was gonna say the I am not the oldest child in my family, but I connect a lot with the like firstborn child struggle, especially
mhm.
like firstborn quote unquote female child. Like you are
Yeah.
often tapped as like a third parent in a lot of situations.
Yeah.
And I didn't have it as much, luckily, because I am not actually the oldest, but in dealing with family events planning and stuff like that, because
Mhm.
of who I am as a person, I want to be planning things 2-3 weeks ahead, and nobody
Yeah.
else is really like that. And so this year actually was the first year where I was like sat down with my siblings and I was like, there are four of us and we have two parents, and they each have a birthday, and we have Mother Father's
Mhm.
Day. We can all work together on Christmas, but the three of y'all are going to take three of those other events because I can't do everything. Because every
Yes.
time it was me saying, mom's birthday's coming up. What are we getting her? Father's Day's coming up. Where are we going to do breakfast for dad? Like I was
Mhm.
always the one that was taking charge of those things because I was the one who thought of it first. And then
Yeah.
I think my siblings got into this habit where they were like, well, Nicole's going to take care of it. You know, I don't have to look 2-3 weeks ahead to see that dad's birthday is coming up because Nicole's going to remind me, and
Mhm.
they're going to figure something out. So
Oh, that one right there. Depending on me, so you not doing what you supposed to do, like remembering something.
that one, because I don't just remember things, I put it in my calendar and I put a
Make an
reminder in
effort.
my calendar.
Yeah. Oh.
Like I use the tools that are available to you also.
Mhm.
So at the beginning of this year, I was like, I'll take charge on planning mom's birthday because she has a January birthday. And I was like,
Mhm.
but you all are going to figure out the rest. And having to sit back and be like, and even talking to my dad, because he would be like, should I not plan something for this day for my birthday or something? I'd be like, I don't know. You're gonna have to ask one of your other children because I'm not in charge of that one.
Yep. And that's what it looks like though. I think that's what that growth looks like of like literally, dusting your hands off and being like, it's not my problem.
Hmm.
I don't
And
know. Question
but it
marks.
it can be so hard too, though, because I'm like, I
It
really
is.
appreciate my parents, and I don't want to let them down. But I'm also like,
Mhm.
it's not me that's letting them down. I gave
Mhm.
everybody their assignments, which is already
Yeah.
more than I should be doing.
Yeah.
um,
And I think that's where the kindness comes in because that we
mhm.
naturally want to you know, be those people who can support and want to do something kind and something to show our care for those people and whatever that looks like. But then it also, once again, that fine line of where does niceness come in, of we're pushing ourselves
Hmm.
and we're stepping out of our boundaries in order to
Hmm.
appease.
Yeah.
So I
And
get that. Yeah.
it kind of also comes down to like being willing to let other people fail. Like,
Hmm.
especially with work, that was something that I kind of struggled with. Whereas, like, as when you're working in partnership with people or in a team, I would always get into kind of the pitfall of like, or even with my siblings, that's like a team of people where I'm like, I am part of this team. So the way that things work out is a reflection of the team as a whole and therefore a reflection of me. So when one of my siblings, forgets to make any plans to
Hmm.
celebrate Father's Day, you know, I feel like that's a failure on me, especially because I'm usually the one that takes care of it. So that like
Mm,
being able to be like, it's on them. And if they screw up, that's on them. I'm not going to take as much responsibility as I would like
yeah,
to for that because I can't do that every time. And
exactly.
in the moment, it's not necessarily nice to the person where my youngest brother, doesn't get a lot of those like social family responsibilities of planning
Mm,
and stuff like that. So I might, text him on the side and be like, if you need anything, let me know. So he knows that I'm there, but I'm not going to teach him how to do it because
mhm.
that might be the nice thing to do, but he's not going to learn how to figure
Yeah,
that out himself. So it's
exactly.
that nice, kind split. It's
Mhm,
kinder to let him learn a life skill, but it
mhm.
doesn't feel as nice.
Yeah, exactly. Ooh, that's so true too, because like I think that's where I kind of like I kind of get labeled as like the mean older sister because I can be pretty harsh and stern at this point. Like, no, you got to figure it out. Like,
Mhm.
I will do that now. Like, no, you got to figure it out. And I think once again, being a first child, I'm like, I had to figure it out and I was able to. Not saying that that's the right way to go, but I also just think that I know for a fact sometimes they didn't even try.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
they're just like, oh, yeah, KaVonna knows. I'm just going to get
Yeah,
the
I'll just
answer for her.
ask. They did all the
Yeah.
work.
Uh-huh. Like, come on now. Like,
Yeah.
do some work. Do some work, please.
Yeah,
Um,
that's how I felt with a lot of like my siblings doing college stuff is that I was
mm,
always the one that was tapped because I figured out how to do all that myself. So when
mhm,
my brothers were doing it and were like figuring out how to file the FAFSA, it was always Nicole, how do I do this? And my parents even tapping me to say, hey,
mhm.
you were the one that did this when I was doing it for you. Can you
Yeah.
help out your sibling? And I'm like, ah, yes, I will, because paying for school is a pain in the ass, but
Yeah.
ah. And
Yeah. I feel that. I definitely will help when that time comes. I haven't
mhm,
had to do that yet. Um, my siblings and I, there are some gappages.
mm,
Um, so and I don't know, maybe my brother who's closest to that period of graduation, I don't know if he wants to go to college. I don't know if that's his journey, but I definitely see that eventually happening at some point.
mhm.
And I'm like, I'll help. Now, I'm getting further and further away from college. I don't know how helpful I will be at a certain point.
Yeah,
Um,
because I keep changing it.
yeah,
So
and it keeps changing. Like for me, FAFSA was an October thing. Is it still October? I don't know. Like,
yeah,
I don't know.
so I'm like,
Um, but I don't
you
know. It's a
need,
journey.
hmm
Speaking of though, like connecting back to boundaries, I do want to
hmm
shift that focus. Um, because I think a big part of shifting your perspectives on like kindness and niceness comes into realizing you need boundaries to protect yourself.
hmm
It's in a way standing up for yourself. um so we talked about a few ways, but what other ways have you created boundaries that specifically protect your well-being, but also can probably still empower others
hmm
to respect
uh,
their limits.
uh, a couple of things. First of all, it's kind of like embracing the mindset of boundaries, especially when I was first learning about them. I was like, oh my God, I'm being so mean right now by saying no to this person. Like, I would refer to it as like, I'm learning how to be an asshole again. And like, sometimes I got to use those asshole skills to like,
Yeah.
get what I want in certain situations. And it really differs depending on the people involved in the situation. But
Yeah.
like there's a tweet I saw that made me think of it, that was like, y'all be like, I'm entering my villain era, and it's just you asserting boundaries. And it's like, saying no to somebody is needed at times, and
Yeah.
that's not learning how to not be a people pleaser. For me, sometimes characterizing it as like, I'm being an asshole right now, he, when it's like I'm
Mhm.
just literally setting the most bare boundaries of like, I can't do that.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's not just saying no, because for me that is more difficult, is like when somebody asks me for something and being like, no.
Yeah.
um it's I found that it's easier to kind of lay out what I'm comfortable with at the beginning. So, like I said, with that example of like
Mhm.
organizing my siblings for family event planning and stuff like that, I was like, here's what I'm doing,
Mhm.
kind of laying out my expectations, but also being open to like, if somebody's like, oh, I can't do it this week, and somebody switch with me, that might happen and that's going to be fine. But all I'm willing to do is this, and I'll put that forward. And then it's kind of a pre-established boundary of like, I told you what I was willing to do. And then if somebody asks me to do something outside it, that being able to say, no, I already did my piece, you'll have to figure
Mhm.
something else out. That's a lot easier when I kind of establish boundaries from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. That is true. Now that we are in a place where creating new relationships and connections, you can be like, bam,
Hmm.
here are my boundaries. Um, I think I go back to like workplace of like realizing that there's never really a time where you're like you sit in a meeting, you're like, here are my boundaries as far as like,
Hmm.
but it's along the way of having situations where you have to establish them.
Hmm.
Still figuring that out, but I have learned to like be a little bit more firm in my approaches. What's really weird is that I would address my boundaries at times of like, here are my requests, here's what I need. And then they're like, you're being ridiculous. And then and it's like, oh, okay, well, here we go. But then once again, being firm and being like, actually, this isn't a ridiculous request. I'm
Hmm.
asking you to do this, and this is why. And that usually you got to bring facts and stuff,
Hmm.
for them to be able to be like, oh, okay. But that's usually where I go in that regard. Boundary wise as well. I think it's just been a change of growing up, but even with
Hmm.
families, um, having situations come up is where I then have my chance to kind of like establish those
Hmm.
and being firm. Like literally, I've learned you can't be like, oh, I don't know,
Oh
like,
yeah.
maybe. Like you really have to be like, no, and here is why. If they need a reason, um, or actually, I don't feel comfortable doing that, and here's why, because I feel like they can do it on their own, things like
Hmm.
that. Um, and once again, it's like I'm still kind. I'm still gonna, I'm still, if I think about you, I see something and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this would be great for that. I'm gonna send it to you. Cause
Yeah.
like, but that doesn't make me not nice if it's like you're asking, for some like ridiculous request of me as a person. And I'm like, no, you know.
Hmm.
So I think people just have to understand. Like I think that's why I thought this conversation was important, because I don't think people know the difference as well between
Hmm.
like kindness and niceness and what that could look like. I also think people are so quick to take what you'll give.
Oh yeah.
And that's another important thing as someone as a taker, there's givers and takers, but be aware of how much you are taking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll even set up kind of arbitrary things, like to go back to work. I was usually the very first person that my workplace would call for covers. And it's like, I am working part-time here.
Hmm.
I have a limit on my hours for a reason, because I can't be working that much. It's
Yeah.
especially the type of work that I was doing, like it it weighs on me because I'm always working at 120%. So
Yeah.
being called in one or two times a week on top of those shifts, I was like, I can't sustain this. So I
Hmm.
instituted this rule in myself where I was like, to balance that, I both being able to help out for the team, but not giving so much that they assume that they're always going to have me on call. And then them being
Hmm.
totally hosed when I can't make it that one time. I started instituting in every other. So even if I could move some things around and make it happen, if I had picked up the last shift that they called me about, I'm not going to be doing everything I can to cover this one. They have other
Yeah.
people they can call, and they need to learn to call those other people, or it's literally going to be me every time.
Yeah, that's true. I am curious, what are examples in which you have seen you really drop your boundaries and and it's actually led to like healthier relationships or like even improved your self-esteem and self-respect as a person? Would you say like maybe the your work experience was examples of that, or like what helped?
I'm definitely still learning in all of those aspects, and I think this
Hmm.
is kind of where this conversation started. Is you would talk about your experience at work and your establishing boundaries, and I'd always be like, oh my god, I wish I could do that, because I still am like a little afraid to do a lot of those things. But
I was afraid too. I was afraid while I was setting my boundaries. Yeah,
yeah,
as
that's the
I
thing,
said.
like,
Yeah.
especially in that like learning period where you're trying to figure out how to do it, is really hard.
Hmm.
But once you get that like first no in, first boundary in, it's a lot easier to be like, oh, I did that, and
Yeah.
this relationship didn't completely blow up. I don't have to just do whatever they want me to do
Yeah.
to keep this relationship going. um One example that isn't a work one is in family. Like, my older sister,
Mhm.
I love her a lot, but there definitely came a point where I was like, I can't be so invested in making sure that I am always there for her in all the ways that she has relied on me for things. Like,
Mhm.
the really big one is getting rides places, because I drive and I have a car and she doesn't have a license, and like, she gets around fine on her own, but there was a
Mhm.
period of time where it was like every time she needed something, she would be like, "Hey, can you give me a ride here? Hey, can you give me a ride here?" Even to the point where she'd be like, "Hey, do you want to hang out?" And I'd be like, "Do you want to hang out, or do you want to ride to something that you want to do?"
Yeah.
And that point of doubt was like, that's not really good for our relationship. So
Yeah.
I started kind of like with the covering shifts at work. I was like
Mhm.
every other, where she would ask me one time, and I was like, even if I was just like not feeling it that day, I'd be like, oh, I
Mhm.
can't today. That's
Yeah.
not saying like, and I think at some point I said, I can't give you a ride everywhere. And that was
Mhm.
a big one for me, where I was like, I've given myself permission to say no
Yeah.
sometimes.
Mhm.
And then being able to say, like, I can't today,
Mhm.
versus like, because I would get, like you said, I would get really frustrated and end up getting kind of passive aggressive about it. And
Yeah.
that wasn't nice for her to experience. And it wasn't nice for me to experience. So
Mhm.
being able to like give myself permission to say no and then stick to it has been a lot healthier for that, where now I'm not every time thinking like, oh, does she actually want to hang out, or
Mhm.
does she need a ride?
Yeah.
So it's like a small thing, but it's definitely like in my journey of establishing boundaries and not thinking about pleasing everybody all the time. It was kind of a big moment, because it was family
Yeah.
too, which is a lot harder to do that
Yeah.
with.
Uh-huh. I was about to say mine is specifically with my mom actually. So like after
Mm,
graduating 2020, like there were a lot of different things going on, and
mhm.
um I had a way about him. I felt a way about him and I didn't say anything, and I was very like passive aggressive and um had a bit of an attitude, and for me that's not like a normal case scenario, especially now as I'm an adult, outside of my teen years. And so that led to some tension to the point where everything kind of blew up, and
Mm,
it was avoidable with me just like speaking my thoughts, and I didn't speak my thoughts. But then eventually, though, the blow up then resulted in me. Either way, it's gonna happen. So then I
yeah.
spoke my thoughts, um, and that was a part of our relationship trajectory. Like now we're in a way better spot, like way
Mhm.
better spot, and I'm comfortable being able to be like, if not that there's any, we've talked things out that I can't think of any issue besides 2020, like
Yeah.
so. But that's the thing though, being comfortable, like especially with family, I think it's always hard to, you should be comfortable being directly honest, but then it's also like, once again, going back to the nice thing of, oh, I don't want to hurt their feelings, or oh, I don't want
Yeah.
to, make them uncomfortable, or make them mad, or things like that. But sometimes things just need to be talked out, and
Yeah.
it's okay.
And I do think, as uncomfortable as it can be in the moment, those like watershed moments of like blow ups where you everything that you've been keeping back kind of comes out, it forces you to talk about them. And when you're on the other side of it, you're like, you know, because my biggest struggle with family is I'm like, I don't want to ruin this relationship by,
Mm-hmm.
you know, not being supportive or whatever that leads me to being too nice.
Yeah.
But like family is a lot thicker than that. Like I have had friendships that have ended on like some small thing that got, way blown out of proportion. But
Yeah.
it's different with family. Like it for good and for bad. I feel like because I'm like I can't just stop being family with this person
Mm-hmm.
to a certain degree. Like you're always going to be seeing them at family events and things like that. But at the same time, they're family. They're stuck with you as much as you're stuck with them. So if you
Mm-hmm.
establish those boundaries, whether it's in a explosive way or not, like because you're family, there's a little bit more like grace that should be given. And hopefully, and in my experience so far, I haven't had a lot of like big family fights.
Same,
Mm,
yeah.
knock on
Yeah.
wood.
Yeah.
Um, but because it's family, it's a little bit easier. It helps me have a little bit more faith that like I can be more honest with this person than I might be with somebody I don't know as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Wow. It's a topic that could go for days. It's another one.
Hmm.
Like one of those like super like introspective like topics. But once again though, I think it's important to people know the difference.
Hmm.
To wrap up this episode, once again, knowing the difference. Know which friends are the ones that are really nice, and maybe learning not to take too much. Or if you're someone who's too nice, learn how to not give so much and learn your boundaries a
Hmm.
little bit more. If you're a naturally kind person, keep being kind, but just know when you kind of like tip over
Yeah.
in order to like, start trying to please others, just be aware of that. Take care of yourself. Thank you so much, Nicole, for joining this episode. Like I said, it's something that we talked about forever. So if we find new ideas in our
Yeah.
conversations and journeys, we could always bring them back up, because there's
There's
always a
always
story.
more.
Yeah, there's
Yep.
always a story. For my listeners, you can go ahead and follow Nicole. Check out Nicole's website, nsowers.com. That's nsowers.com. I'll drop all the details in the description. Make sure you share, like, and follow this podcast. Send it to a friend, a family member, a loved one. Follow me at KaVonna on Instagram to get podcast updates. And make sure you get some sunshine, get some air. Have an amazing week. I will see you next week on the Introvert Social Hour. Thanks for joining. Bye.